Hello. This is a story that reflects Alberta history and name places, which I think is very, very important. I was once the resident storyteller at Fort Edmonton Park, and when I told stories there, I told stories in the fort itself in a place called Rundle's Chapel. Now, Rundle's name is well known around Alberta. There are schools named after him in Calgary and St. Albert and Edmonton. There's a mountain in Banff. There's a church in Banff named Rundle. There's neighborhoods, and there's Rundle Park in Edmonton as well. And so the story of his name and his legacy continues on. But a lot of people didn't know who Rundle actually was. One of the stories that I told was this one. It's probably my favorite. When Rundle was asked to come from England to Hudson Bay, or by the Hudson Bay Company to Fort Edmonton, it was in 1840, and they thought that he would arrive, stay in the fort, look after the spiritual needs of the people who worked there and the native people who came into trade, and all would be fine. But as I mentioned, Rundle was a missionary and he wanted to travel to the native villages. Now, there were no close villages to Fort Edmonton, and so in order to do what he wanted to do, he had to travel. In the winter, he would go by dog sled. In the summer, he went by horseback. But whenever he went anywhere, he took with him his pet cat. That sounds cozy and sweet and totally doable. But in 1840, there were no pet cats in Alberta. There were wildcats, but domestic cats, no, there was no such thing in our environment. And so in order for him to have a pet cat, he had it sent to him from England. So think about this cat. It traveled all the way across the ocean to eastern Canada, and then it traveled through the waterways all across the country until it got to Fort Edmonton. And when it arrived, it was very, very precious. Robert Rundle had no problem putting it on the dog sled. But have you ever tried putting a cat on a horse? That's where he had a problem. So in order to fix that, he got a long piece of string and he made a harness around the cat with one end of the string, and then he tied the other end of the string to the saddle horn. Then he'd get into the saddle, tuck the cat into his capote, his jacket, and the cat actually rode on his chest. But one day, he was in Fort Carleton in Saskatchewan, just getting ready to come back to Fort Edmonton. He was on the horse. The cat was tucked into the jacket, and for some reason, the horse started moving backwards. And as he did so, the cat became very, very curious, and it tucked out one paw, and then it tucked out another paw. When it tucked out its third paw on its head, it fell completely out of the jacket. Because it was tied to that string, it went flying through the air. Because it was tied to that string, it came flying back, but now it was a frightened cat. And when cats are frightened, they put out their claws to grab onto the first thing they can, which was the horse. And as those claws went into that horse bucked like crazy. The string broke, the cat went flying in one direction, Robert Rundle went flying in the other, and the entire time that Rundle was in the air, he kept saying, "Lord, please take care of my cat." And the cat was fine. And so was Robert Rundle. But there was a man who was watching the whole thing, and he almost had a very serious injury from laughing so hard. His name was Paul Kane, and Paul Kane was an artist. And in his book called The Wanderings of an Artist, he spends a full page talking about how funny Robert Rundle looked flying through the air. Robert Rundle didn't find it quite as funny. In his diary that day, he wrote simply, "Fell off my horse today." End of story. The cat for sure did not find it funny, would not go anywhere near that horse. And lucky for Rundle, one of the York boats was leaving Fort Carleton for Fort Edmonton, and so the cat came back by boat. Robert Rundle was here for 8 years, traveling around Alberta and Saskatchewan. He always had a cat. He had two, actually, one after the other, and both of them were male. And so when he went back to England in 1848, there were still no domestic cats in Alberta. What he left, of course, as I mentioned before, was a legacy of his place names and his story. And so look around your neighborhood, your town, your school. Why do they have the names they have? I'm sure there's a story that you can tell. Thank you for listening, and thank you for the Young Alberta Book Society for offering me this chance to tell you one of the stories of Robert Rundle.